In the heart of the most rational city in the ancient world, there was a darkness that reason could not touch, a cult so secretive that its members were forbidden, on pain of death, from revealing what happened inside its ceremonies, so powerful that it counted emperors, philosophers, and generals among its initiates, so terrifying that the city of Athens, a city that had debated, dissected, and philosophically dismantled virtually every idea it had ever encountered, never once seriously tried to shut it down, because deep down, Athens was afraid of what might happen if it did. Its name was the cult of Dionysus, and what happened in its rituals, in the mountains, in the darkness, in the spaces between the civilized world and whatever lay beyond it, has never been fully explained. Tonight, we get as close as anyone has ever gotten to the truth. Of all the Greek gods, Dionysus was the one that Athens understood least and feared most. On the surface, he seemed almost approachable, the god of wine, of theater, of celebration and festivity, the deity whose festivals gave birth to Greek drama, to tragedy and comedy, two of the most enduring art forms the ancient world ever produced. But beneath the wine and the theater and the garlands of ivy, there was something else. Dionysus was the only Olympian god who had died and been reborn. According to the myth, he was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. Hera, consumed by jealousy, tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his full divine form. Zeus complied. Semele was incinerated by the sight of a god in his true nature, but Semele was pregnant. Zeus saved the unborn child by sewing him into his own thigh, carrying him to term, and giving birth to Dionysus himself, the child who had survived his mother's death, who had been born from a father's body, who carried within him a unique combination of mortal vulnerability and divine power. The Titans, at Hera's instigation, later tore the infant Dionysus apart and ate him. He was reconstituted and reborn. Death and resurrection. Dismemberment and reconstitution. These were not incidental details of the Dionysus myth. They were its core, its engine, the reason his worship took the forms it did. Because Dionysus was not just the god of wine. He was the god of what happens when the boundaries between things dissolve, between life and death, between human and animal, between the civilized and the wild, between the self and everything that is not the self, and his cult was dedicated to making those boundaries dissolve. In practice, the female devotees of Dionysus were called Maenads, from the Greek word for madness. Their rituals took place at night, in the mountains, away from the city, away from its laws, its hierarchies, its careful social structures. They wore fawn skins. They carried the thyrsus, a fennel staff topped with a pine cone that was the sacred symbol of Dionysus. They let their hair loose, a significant act in a society where respectable women kept their hair carefully bound. And then they danced, not the controlled, choreographed dancing of official civic ceremonies. Something wilder, something that ancient sources describe with a combination of horror and fascination, a frenzy that built over hours, fueled by wine and music and the collective energy of women moving together in darkness, until the boundaries of individual identity began to dissolve and something else took over. The Greeks called this state ecstasis, standing outside oneself, the origin of our word ecstasy. In this state, ancient sources claim, the Maenads became capable of things that should have been impossible, of extraordinary physical feats, of handling fire without burning, of a strength that seemed to exceed normal human limits, and of something darker. The myth of Dionysus includes the practice of sparagmos, the ritual tearing apart of a living animal with bare hands, and omophagia, the eating of raw flesh. Whether these practices were literally carried out in actual Maenad rituals, or whether they were mythological elaborations of something less extreme, has been debated by scholars for centuries. What is not debated is that the Athenians believed they happened, and that belief, the city's certainty that in the mountains, in the darkness, respectable women were doing things that respectable women were absolutely not supposed to do, was itself a source of profound social anxiety. Because the Maenads were not marginal figures. They were not the poor, the desperate, the socially excluded. They were the wives and daughters of the men who ran Athens. And for one night a year, those women left the city, left their households, left their husbands, and went into the mountains, alone. Athens did not shut down the cult of Dionysus. It funded it. The city Dionysia, the great annual festival of Dionysus held in Athens, was one of the most important civic events of the Athenian calendar. The state paid for it. The most celebrated playwrights of the age competed in it. Tens of thousands of citizens attended it. This seems paradoxical until you understand what Athens was actually doing. The city had learned something that every sophisticated power structure eventually learns. You cannot eliminate the forces that threaten your order. You can only channel them. The wild, boundary-dissolving energy of Dionysus, the energy that sent women into the mountains and dissolved social hierarchies and made people do things they would never do in daylight, that energy was real. It existed. It would find expression with or without official sanction. Better to give it a time, a place, a structure. Better to contain the explosion in a controlled environment than to try to prevent it and discover that you could not. The theater was that controlled environment. Greek tragedy, the art form born from Dionysian ritual, gave Athenian audiences a space to experience extremity safely, to watch characters transgress every boundary, commit every forbidden act, suffer every possible consequence, and then walk out of the theater and back into their ordered, law-abiding lives. Aristotle called this catharsis, the purging of dangerous emotions through their controlled artistic expression. It was, among other things, one of the most sophisticated pieces of political management the ancient world ever produced. But it was never complete. Because Dionysus, unlike the other Olympian gods, was never fully domesticated, never fully brought inside the civic order. He always retained that wild edge, that connection to the mountains and the darkness, and the dissolution of everything the city had built. He was the god Athens needed to worship precisely, because he represented everything Athens feared. And in that tension, between the ordered city and the wild god at its heart, lay something that the Greeks understood and we have perhaps forgotten. Civilization is not the absence of darkness. It is the decision to build something anyway, in full knowledge that the darkness is there, and that it is never going away. The cult of Dionysus outlasted Athens. It outlasted Greece. It outlasted Rome. Elements of it, the ecstatic ritual, the dissolution of boundaries, the sacred use of altered states, appear in religious traditions across the ancient world and echo in practices that exist to this day. Because the need that Dionysus met is not a Greek need. It is a human one. The need to step outside the self, to dissolve, briefly, the boundaries that separate us from each other and from something larger, to touch, for a moment, whatever lies on the other side of the careful, constructed identity we present to the world every day. Athens built the most rational civilization the ancient world had ever seen. And at its heart, it kept a god of madness. That was not a contradiction. That was wisdom. This has been Whispers of Athens. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell us which ancient mystery you want us to uncover next. Because some doors, once opened, are very hard to close. And we have only just begun to knock.